This man Frank finds a beautiful lady walking on the road and he asks to give her a lift to save her from too much sunshine. The woman enters the car and he asks her the name. They interact and he is given a contact and the lady moves out of the car since she had reached her destination, and the man continues his journey. After 4 days, he invites the lady in his house for the first time, and after he takes the lady to his mother, he tells his mum that he is going to marry the lady, which made the mother happy and she blessed them. One day Frank prepares himself to eat lunch at home, but suddenly an evil power hits his chest, and before he begins to eat his food, he counts the pieces of meat in his plate as he angrily complains, and he calls out his wife. When the wife came, he started hitting her, accusing her for serving him small meat as a sign of disrespect. He then pours water on her and leaves the sitting room, and the wife gets up and sits on the chair weeping. Frank's mother visited him to advise him on what he did. She told him, "A real man can't beat up his wife for silly reasons like serving him little meat cause it's so embarrassing," but Frank replied that he can't beat such disrespect, and his mother told him that he should stop being kiddish cause he is mature, and she left his house. After some months, his wife was sitting in their lounge eating an apple while watching a movie, but she suddenly started to feel pain in her tummy and throat. She also saw blood on the apple from his mouth, but more blood continued to come through her ears and mouth as she held her tummy in pain, but Frank found her and hurried to take her for treatment. We also see a young girl called Sandra who tries to hug her boyfriend who has come from a car, but this time he refused the hug. The man said that he has been threatened by a certain man in his dreams, and the second day an invisible hand slapped him on his cheek leaving a mark. Sandra thought that her boyfriend was joking around until he told her that she has a spiritual husband who wants to kill him, concluding that he can't be with her, and he entered his car leaving Sandra broken and shocked. Frank was arrested by the police that were brought by his mother-in-law accompanied by the brother accusing him for killing her daughter. To the side of Sandra's family, we see her mother talking to her father, explaining to her that Sandra has spent days denying food, locking herself in her room and trying to kill herself because her boyfriend chucked her. The father accompanied by the mother decided to talk to her depressed daughter, and they advised her to not kill herself because of a mere man who broke her heart. The crying mother told her daughter that she will kill her if she continues to be so sad, but she explained to them that every man who plans to marry her gives her the same reason and chucks her. But when the father heard that, he stood up, moved out and called the guy who had chucked his daughter, telling him that he can't play with her daughter and just dump her like that. He continues to tell him that God will deal with him, and he hung up the call and entered the house. After 6 months, we see Frank with another wife in his sitting room who asks him to leave her to rest, and Frank agrees and leaves the sitting room. Suddenly the wife starts to feel pain in her body and calls out Frank to help her. When Frank comes, he finds her with blood coming from her mouth, and when he tries to help her out she instantly dies in his hands. Frank, so terrified and sad, narrates to his mother all the incidents about the death of every wife he gets while holding his head. Frank is visited by his friend and narrates the story of the death of every wife he gets. He tells him that he is so perplexed and don't know what to do. In the next few months we see Frank's mother visiting him, and she was very happy to see him fine, but she also tells him that the only thing that can make him more happy is a grandson, and Frank told her that he will get for her a grandson in the right time. The next day when his friend visits, he tells him that his mother is pressuring him to get married and give her a grandson, but his friend tells him that all mothers are like that cause that's what his mother was doing to him until he married. One day Sandra's friend, Linda, was standing on the road, but Sandra's mother knew her and she was so happy to find and asked her where she had been all this long time, but she only replied that she had been in upcountry. Linda also asked her about Sandra, but Sandra's mother narrated to her about the incidents that had happened to her friend, about the guys who had showed her interest to marry her but got cold feet, and she has been depressed and a loner in her room. Linda told her to join her and they visit their family prophet, but Sandra's mother had refused because she doubts some prophets, but Linda convinced her and she agreed to visit her the next day, and she proceeded with her journey. The next day Sandra's mother and Linda came to the prophet's house, sat them down and asked them what the matter was. Sandra's mother narrated to her all the relationship her daughter has been in but vanished the moment they agreed to get married. The prophet then requested them to stand and they prayed over it. After the prayer, the prophet told them that God showed him the root cause of the problem and Sandra knows about it, and he told her mother to quickly go fetch her and bring her at his home for prayers. That afternoon Sandra was brought to the prophet, who asked her about her relationship in high school and the name called Frank. She tried to figure out the name until she remembered that in high school she had a boyfriend called Frank with whom they were so in love, and he is the one that took off her virginity. Whenever she could find his boyfriend in a certain conversation with other girls, she could cause chaos because of jealousness as Frank tries to save them. One day Susan convinced his boyfriend about something called a blood oath. It's a sign of true love, and she gave him a coffee bean. She cut her finger and put the bean, and she helps him to do so. After they exchange the beans and they wrap their hands with each other. They spoke oaths, beginning with the boy saying that until death will do us apart, and the girl also swore the same words, and they are the coffee beans. After eating the beans, they hugged each other with a smile on the face. But the next day we see Sandra so worried and confused, and Frank came to her and told her how he has been looking for her. Then he asked her why she was so sad. Sandra stood up and replied that her father is taking her and her siblings to another city to study from there, and she will rarely visit him. But Frank was down and cried. Sandra told him to be strong, cause she also can't disobey her father, and she hugged him. When the mother heard this, she was so shocked, and she asked Sandra what was the reason she made the blood covenant, and she replied that she didn't know. But the prophet replied, it's well because God told him that Sandra and the boyfriend in high school are supposed to get married, and they all asked him how, but he replied to them that God has confirmed it and he will make it happen. He told them God will organize their meeting, and he then asked them to pray. When they got back home, Sandra's mother narrated all of the story to the father, and she told him that thank God, he said that he will organize the meeting with that unknown Frank, and the father agreed to see the greatness of God. In the afternoon, Sandra visited her friend and told her about the blood covenant thing that almost killed her. Her friend told her indeed she went too far, but Sandra said that God used the prophet to discover that, and also told them that God will link them up with the guy cause he is the one supposed to marry her. After 4 days, Sandra was almost knocked by a car as she was crossing the road, and the guy moved out of the so angry, and he asked her whether she is blind and stupid because she could have died, but Sandra replied that he drives carelessly and also in a stupid way, and the man entered his car and left. A week later, as Sandra was waiting for a ride to go somewhere, Frank had passed but came back, moved out of the car, and told him he is the guy that quarreled with him last week on the road, and he asked her to enter the car for a lift, which she agreed to. When she entered the car, Frank told her his name and he requested for her name too, but she told him she will tell her later. Frank then told her instantly that he wants to marry her, and she was surprised, but she told him that he is that quick that he should probably give her time that they get to know each other, which Frank agreed to. When Sandra went home, she called her parents in the meeting and informed them about the young man she just met twice but wants to marry her, but the mother replied to her that it can't be that instant, and the father also told her that they struggled with her heartbreak and they advised him to be careful. We also see Frank with his friend worried that he may marry that new girl and she ends up dying like the others, but his friend advised him to go to a herbalist, but Frank immediately refused that he can't serve two masters. After some days, Frank brought Sandra home. They started to talk and she told him her name, but Frank told her that Sandra was the name of his girlfriend in high school whom he loved so much, but she left him in tears and changed the school. But as he spoke, Sandra connected her past with his words and she was so shocked and called him Amobi, his surname. Frank was shocked, stood up and called her name again, Sandra, but all of them couldn't believe what was happening. Sandra clapped her hand to wake up, but it was true, and she stood up, hugging Frank with tears of joy. After they sat down, Sandra then told him how much she missed him, but Frank told him how he had been tormented and suffering with his relationships, but Sandra told her it will be fine as long they have found themselves. When Sandra got back home, she told her parents that the guy she has been meeting was the real Frank and he is coming to meet them in a few, and this made the parents so glad and they praised God. She also told her friend about it, that the prophecy God had given the prophet was fulfilled, and she was so glad and wished her well. The movie ends when Frank and his lovely wife are celebrating the pregnancy that God has protected for 8 months as joy filled the house. Moral of the story: never indulge in any blood covenant, it will torment your whole life.